Alright, so you're feeling pretty good about your character's voice. Okay, now we want to get that voice onto the page. To begin, first rule, less is more. You know how you hate it when someone just drones on and on? Your readers hate it when your characters drone on and on even more. So, even though you don't necessarily need to have Hemingway dialogue, type dialogue where everything is clipped and cut down to the absolute bare minimum, you do want your dialogue to be concise and direct, and don't use any more words than you have to get it done, to get the job done of revealing the information and revealing the character and the feelings and emotions that we talked about before. So, what does that mean? That means no chit-chat. You know, this is a place where we divert from reality. You know, you run into somebody in the street and you usually engage in chit-chat. You talk about the weather, you talk about how the family is, you talk about how they're feeling, all those kind of things. In dialogue, in fiction and narrative nonfiction, we don't do any of that. Those are wasted calories, and they keep us from getting to the point. Because that's what we're trying to do here: get the information out, get the feelings and emotions out, and move on. Okay, so no chit chat, none of that stuff, unless there's some really, I don't know what it would be, unless there's some really important reason to have that. But in any case, minimize it right down to the bone. Okay, so we also don't want to use much in the way of italics and exclamation points. Okay. That's also something that really sort of gets on your reader's nerves and is distracting. Italics, to emphasize something. If your dialogue is strong enough, it won't really need much of that. And the same thing goes for exclamation points. One of the things that drives me nuts is I read something and it's just full and peppered with exclamation points. Well, what are you going to do with something when something really exciting happens, okay, or something really strong comes out of the dialogue? You can't use two. These are not comic books. Speaking of which, we don't ever use capitals in dialogue. Again, these are not comic books. So we're depending on the strength of the dialogue to get the job done. Okay. And what are the parts of speech and grammar we don't want to use? We don't want to use chit-chat. We don't want to use italics. We want to minimize our exclamation points and no capital letters at all. Okay. So that brings us to profanity, which in a way goes under the same rule as the exclamation point. If you use a lot of profanity, it's going to lose its power. The power of using cursing when you need to use that is that it happens very rarely and it kind of jumps out at you. And so if you use it over and over again, it'll just lose its power and it won't do you any good. And then again, what are you going to do when something really heated happens? You're going to be lost because there's nowhere else to go. Now I want to talk to you about stage business. And stage business is a term that we get from the stage. And what does that mean? That means that things characters do, so they're not just standing there talking. And they use that on the stage. Somebody picks up a cup of coffee or something like that. In the old days, it was they were smoking a cigarette. But we can use that stage business in our dialogue as part of the dialogue. If somebody slams something down on the table, that character doesn't have to say, "I'm angry." Okay, you don't need that dialogue. That stage business has taken care of that. Same thing with posture and expressions of face. They are part of dialogue. Consider them part of dialogue. They can also help you in a scene kind of manage the rhythm of that scene and the highs and lows of the drama in that scene just by using that stage business. Okay, so you will see in an example that I put on on the website that there are whole pieces of dialogue that are completely taken care of by stage business. And what are attributions? They're the he said, she says of our dialogue. Now, you're not going to have an attribution for every line of dialogue, obviously. So I want to share with you the Elmore Leonard rule, and his rule was that you never ever use anything except he said and she said. So I don't totally agree with that, and what I've always told my students is when you need an attribution, 75% of the time use he said or she said, and the rest of the time you can use like she whispered or shouted. But Elmore Leonard's point was the dialogue itself should be strong enough that you don't need any other kind of attribution except he said or she said. Something else that you can do is a piece of stage business in place of an attribution. So instead of saying, I'm leaving, he said, you can say, he got up from the table, I'm leaving. You see, you get rid of the attribution. So one of the places that we get into a lot of trouble with attributions are the ly words, okay, your adverbs. And this is something that just too many authors completely abuse. Ly words are cheat words. Instead of being descriptive, you say, slyly or whatever, any kind of ly word. And what they do is they save you from having to actually do a description. So what you want instead of an ly word, if you're talking about dialogue, is some bit of description that reveals, that shows how that character is presenting at that moment. So I want you to be really, really careful about your ly words. You can never get away with eliminating them totally, but please minimize them because they really do get in your way, and they don't. You kind of cheat your readers. Something else, quick rule. Don't go beyond, 7 lines of dialogue without identifying a speaker, because I don't know about you, but it drives me nuts when I have to count back through the lines and say, who said that? Okay, so again, maybe 7 lines of dialogue, and then identify a speaker either by an attribution or by some bit of stage business. Speaking of which, if you don't have one speaker, don't give one speaker more than 4 or 5 sentences of dialogue without some kind of a break. And again, that can be a bit of stage business in there someplace. And the way I write dialogue is I always put my first attribution after my first line of dialogue. Okay, I've seen other authors will have like 3 or 4 sentences and then they'll have the attribution there, and that's just a personal thing with me. I put it after the first sentence of dialogue and get it out of the way, and then be finished with that and move on. So be mindful of that. Okay, be mindful of these rules and how important dialogue is, and use your ears. What you're trying to do is present characters who talk like real people, who talk like, except for the chit-chat part, who speak naturally and realistically, and that's part of drawing your reader in and selling them on your character and on the action and the exchange of dialogue that's taking place. Now, 2 things. We will be speaking about how dialogues makes up scenes in the scene structure section, and on the web page, if you go and click on www.davidfulmer.com and go to the Fiction Shop page, you will see another link to a document called "This is how your dialogue appears on the page," and that'll excuse me, that'll be a big help to you. So go visit that and come back and visit Fiction Shop for scene structure and all the other segments that we're presenting.